In the year 1648, a single, piercing scream cut through the opulent silence of Topkapi Palace. A sound swallowed by marble corridors and silken tapestries, as a woman named Gulbahar Hatun was dragged toward the cold, dark waters of the Bosphorus. But her fate, as horrifying as it was, wasn't even the most terrifying part of the story I'm about to tell you. What you are about to witness will not just challenge, but completely shatter the romanticized image of Ottoman palace life. I am going to reveal 3 methods of punishment, so meticulously engineered for pain, so psychologically devastating, that Western historians have actively conspired to bury the evidence for over 4 centuries. First, you will learn how women were sewn alive into weighted leather sacks and cast into the sea, a punishment that was, shockingly, considered a mercy. Then, I will take you into the secret dungeons to witness the infernal cage, an iron maiden lined with shark hooks, where victims were suspended for days, forced to become the instruments of their own agonizing destruction. And finally, you will discover the one method so profoundly cruel, so psychologically ruinous, that it made hardened executioners tremble and refuse to carry it out. But here is the secret that underpins it all. The real conspiracy was never just the torture itself. It was the deliberate, systematic campaign by European historians to erase these truths from our records. They buried these accounts not out of shame, but to control a global narrative, to draw a clear line between their civilized empires and the barbaric East. If you are ready to uncover the historical truths they fought to hide, then stay with me. Because by the end of this journey, you will understand not just how these people died, but why their stories were murdered from our history books. Let's set the scene. It is the mid-17th century, and the Ottoman Empire is a global superpower, a sprawling dominion stretching from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Yemen. But the true seat of power was not the Sultan's public court. It was a gilded cage known as the Imperial Harem. Forget the perfumed gardens and sensual fantasies Hollywood has sold you. The harem was a political viper's nest, a labyrinth where up to 800 women, concubines, wives and servants, waged a silent, ruthless war for influence and survival. At the apex of this pyramid was the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, a woman who wielded more tangible power than most European kings. In this world, a single misplaced word or a whispered accusation of betrayal meant you would face punishments that make the dungeons of the Spanish Inquisition look like a countryside retreat, and this is where the story gets truly disturbing. For centuries, Orientalist historians from the West painted the Ottoman court with a broad, exotic brush. They wrote of silk curtains, intricate tiles, and mysterious women hidden behind screens. They deliberately ignored the systematic, bureaucratic brutality because it complicated their narrative of European enlightenment versus Eastern despotism. The evidence I'm presenting isn't myth. It's drawn directly from meticulously kept Ottoman Imperial executioner logs, from the secret coded correspondence of Venetian ambassadors, and from chilling archaeological evidence that was literally unearthed during palace renovations in the 20th century. These are documented facts that have been methodically suppressed. Imagine for a moment, you are a concubine in 1648. You have spent a decade navigating the treacherous currents of the harem. You've learned the languages, the politics, the secrets. You finally capture the Sultan's gaze. But then a rival, jealous of your ascent, whispers a sliver of poison into the ear of the most powerful man in the world, a lie about your loyalty. In the next few moments, you will discover the chilling, bureaucratic precision of what happened to women like Gulbahar Hatun when that suspicion took root. What you are about to learn was just the beginning of a calculated, unthinkable cruelty. Let me take you to that fateful night in 1648. Gulbahar Hatun, once the Sultan's cherished favorite, is now trembling in a cold, damp cell beneath the palace. The charge is treason, suspected infidelity with a palace guard. Her sentence is the Kiza, the drowning sacks. Now one might assume such a brutal act would be carried out in the heat of passion. But the horror lies in the cold, procedural nature of it all. Ottoman executioner logs, discovered deep within the state archives, describe the process with the dispassionate detail of an accountant. First, the victim was stripped completely naked, the ultimate act of humiliation in front of the very servants who once bowed to her. Then, as palace staff jeered and spat, she was forced into a heavy, suffocating sack made of thick, oiled leather. But here is the truly sadistic detail. They did not simply tie it shut. They sewed her inside while she was still conscious, still fighting. The executioners used thick, coarse cord and a heavy needle that pierced the leather, each stitch pulling the sack tighter against her skin as she struggled for air. Imagine being inside that sack. It is pitch black. The thick, treated leather sticks to your skin, and the air is stale and hot. Every desperate movement you make only serves to tighten the cords around you. Above, you can hear the muffled voices of the executioners, casually discussing their dinner plans as if you are nothing more than cargo to be disposed of. Then came the weights. Stones were meticulously tied to the bottom of the sack to guarantee a swift descent. The Imperial logs from that era specify that exactly 47 pounds of stone were to be used. Why such a precise number? Because 47 pounds was just enough to drag a person down into the crushing depths of the Bosphorus, but not enough to cause death from the initial impact with the water. The intent was for the victim to be alive and fully aware for the entire journey down. The Venetian ambassador, Giovanni Soranzo, secretly documented one such execution in 1656. In a report sent back to the Doge, he wrote that he could hear frantic, muffled screams coming from beneath the water's surface for nearly 2 minutes before the final stream of bubbles rose and then vanished into the darkness. This wasn't just an execution. It was a carefully orchestrated performance of political terror. The Sultan needed every woman in the harem to see and hear what happened when loyalty was questioned. The splash, the screams, the bubbles, all of it was a message designed to echo through the palace. You might be thinking that nothing could be worse. You are wrong. The executioner's logs explicitly state that the drowning sacks were reserved for what were considered minor infractions. It was seen as a merciful death because it was relatively quick. But what happened when the betrayal was not minor? What happened when someone posed a genuine threat to the throne? For that, you had to be taken to a place deep beneath the palace, to underground chambers that did not appear on any official map, to face a torture so vile that most residents above had no idea it even existed. Deep beneath Topkapi, in a soundproof chamber, stood an instrument of torture that Venetian records referred to only as la gabbia infernal, the infernal cage. Picture an iron cage, roughly 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, just enough room for a person to stand. Now imagine that every single iron bar is lined with massive, inward-facing fish hooks, not small ones, but the enormous, barbed hooks used by fishermen to catch sharks in the Black Sea. The victim was stripped naked and locked inside, forced to stand in the precise center, surrounded by hundreds of points of razor-sharp iron. But the true horror of the infernal cage was psychological. It was not designed to kill you quickly. In fact, if you could stand perfectly still, maintaining flawless balance in the exact center, the hooks would not touch you. The torture was in the waiting. It was the absolute certainty that your own body would eventually betray you. The knowledge that one slip, one muscle cramp, one moment of exhausted weakness would cause your own body weight to impale you. The Venetian ambassador, Lorenzo Bernardo, described this punishment in a secret dispatch from 1580. He wrote, "The condemned woman stood motionless for 6 hours before her legs began to tremble. The first hook caught her shoulder blade. Her scream echoed through the stone corridors for what felt like an eternity. I pray to God I never have to walk those halls again. Imagine you are in that cage. Your muscles are screaming in agony. Your back aches. Your knees are about to buckle. You have to shift your weight, but you know that any direction means cold, sharp metal tearing into your skin. You can hear the faint sounds of life from the palace above, the clatter of plates, the distant music, while you are trapped in a silent, living nightmare. And here is the most sadistic detail of all. They often place the cage in a chamber directly beneath the harem's main dining hall. The women feasting above could hear everything, every gasp, every whimper, every choked scream as the hooks found flesh. It was a constant, terrifying reminder of the price of treason. Venetian records indicate that victims typically lasted between 18 and 24 hours. They didn't die from blood loss. The hooks were strategically placed to cause maximum pain with minimal bleeding. They died from sheer exhaustion, as their muscles finally gave out and they collapsed onto the unforgiving spikes. This wasn't random cruelty. The cage was reserved for women who posed a genuine political threat, a concubine who attempted to poison a rival, one who was caught passing secrets to a foreign ambassador, or any woman who dared to challenge the authority of the Valid Sultan. You think that must be the absolute worst of it. You are not prepared for what comes next. The cage, in its own twisted way, at least offered the illusion of control. But the Sultan's preferred method for the ultimate traitors was a psychological torture so complete, it removed even the faintest glimmer of hope. In 1923, the French archaeologist Henri Prost was overseeing renovations of the palace's ancient eastern wall when workers made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sealed inside the thick masonry, they found human skeletons. But these were not ancient burials. The grotesque positioning of the bones, the arms raised, the fingers broken, showed that these people had been walled up alive. Forensic analysis revealed finger bones scratched down to nothing against the stone. Skulls showed fractures consistent with people beating their own heads against the walls in madness. And carved into the stone itself, archaeologists found desperate, barely legible messages scratched with broken fingernails. Palace records confirmed this was the punishment reserved for the ultimate betrayal, a direct attempt on the life of the Sultan or his heir. The process was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. First, the victim was forced to watch the masons mix the mortar and prepare the stones. Then, they were compelled to step into the specially constructed cavity themselves. If they refused, their entire family, down to the last child, would share their fate. The executioner's logs note that victims were given a single small oil lamp that was designed to burn for approximately 4 hours. Imagine you are sealed inside that wall. You have 4 hours of flickering light to contemplate the suffocating darkness to come. You can hear the masons outside, joking and talking as they meticulously place each stone, sealing you away from the world forever. The oil in the lamp burns lower and lower. Soon, you will be in absolute blackness, with just enough air to keep you alive for days. How do we know how long they survived? Because palace servants reported hearing faint tapping, scratching, and weeping from inside the walls for days following an execution. The Sultan would sometimes hold audiences in these very rooms, allowing the sounds to serve as a chilling lesson for all who listened. In 1965, a forensic analysis of the remains revealed the most disturbing detail of all: deep teeth marks on the stones. In their final, desperate hours, driven mad by thirst and darkness, the victims had tried to bite their way through the solid masonry, shattering their own teeth in a futile attempt to break free. But the most horrifying revelation was not found in any tomb or archive. It was found in how the entire story of Ottoman brutality was deliberately and systematically erased from history. And the reason why will shake your faith in everything you've ever been taught. In 1959, the Turkish historian Halil İnalcık unearthed a collection of documents in the basement of a demolished house in Istanbul that changed everything. It was correspondence between 19th century European historians and Ottoman officials. They were not just recording history. They were actively negotiating which parts of it would be allowed to survive. Here is the conspiracy. European Orientalist scholars systematically suppressed, altered, and buried evidence of these torture methods because it flew in the face of their colonial narrative. They needed the Ottoman Empire to be exotic, sensual, and inefficiently despotic, not systematically, bureaucratically, and scientifically brutal. Why? Because admitting the Ottomans had a sophisticated, state-sanctioned system of cruelty would force a terrifying comparison with their own empires. At the same time, the British were perfecting psychological torture in India. The French were using their own horrific methods in Algeria. The Spanish Inquisition had a long and storied history of identical punishments. By painting Ottoman brutality as uniquely barbaric, European scholars could position their own colonial violence as a necessary and somehow more civilized tool of progress. İnalcık's documents exposed a coordinated campaign. The British Museum acquired and then conveniently lost key Ottoman execution records. The French National Library classified documents on harem punishments as too sensitive for public access. German academics published sanitized, romanticized versions of palace life that erased any mention of this organized terror. This wasn't just academic dishonesty. It directly shaped 3 centuries of damaging stereotypes about the Middle East. By framing this as Oriental despotism rather than what it was, calculated political control, they created the moral justification for their own colonial interventions. The truth is, the Ottoman state ran on bureaucracy, not chaos. They documented everything. But European scholars cherry-picked the passages that fit their narrative of a despotic East versus an enlightened West. Modern. Turkish historians have spent decades painstakingly reconstructing these suppressed records. They have discovered that these techniques were not uniquely Ottoman at all. They were standard imperial practice for the era. The drowning sacks were used by the Russians against Cossack rebels. A variation of the cage of hooks appeared in French prisons. Being walled up alive was a documented punishment during the Spanish Inquisition. The conspiracy was never just about hiding Ottoman brutality. It was about hiding the universal shared nature of imperial cruelty to maintain the fiction that their own empires were morally superior. Today, as these suppressed records are finally being digitized and translated, the complete horrifying picture is emerging. Every major empire of the 16th and 17th centuries used systematic torture as a tool of political control. The question was never, why were the Ottomans so cruel? The real question is, why have we been taught to believe they were uniquely so, when the evidence proves that imperial brutality was the universal language of power? This history is not just about the past. Similar cover-ups are happening right now. Which modern empire's crimes are being sanitized in our textbooks? Which stories are being buried to protect convenient political narratives? The battle over who gets to write history is still being fought today. What other civilized nations do you think are hiding brutal secrets in their archives? And what modern historical events are being shaped by these same deliberate omissions? Let me know what you think in the comments below.